There is something about you that you may not even be fully aware of, something so natural in the way you carry yourself that you don't stop to think about it, but your soulmate noticed it in a way that stayed with them far longer than they expected. It wasn't something loud or dramatic, not something that immediately demands attention from everyone around you. In fact, it was subtle, almost quiet. The way you wear your clothes, the way they fit into your personality rather than define it, the way you move in them without hesitation or self-consciousness. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal to them. It was just a small detail, something they noticed in passing, the kind of observation that usually fades quickly as attention moves to something else. Before we dive into today's word, I want to thank our coffee partners. We are currently working toward a $120 goal to keep this ministry running and improve our quality. If this channel has been a blessing to you, please check the link in the description or comment box to support. Now, let's get into today's devotion. But this time, it didn't fade. It stayed. And the reason it stayed wasn't because of the clothes themselves, but because of what they represented. There was something about the way you presented yourself that felt real, something that didn't seem forced or carefully constructed for attention. It felt natural, effortless, and that is what made it stand out. In a world where people often try too hard to be seen, to impress, to fit into certain expectations, what they saw in you felt different. It felt unintentional in the best way possible. And that difference is what made them pause, even if only for a moment at first. As time passed, they began to notice it more. Not in a way that was deliberate or planned, but in small moments that repeated themselves. The way you chose certain outfits, the way your style remained consistent with who you are, the way you didn't seem to change yourself to match the environment around you. These details started to form a pattern in their mind. And when patterns begin to form, they naturally lead to interpretation. They started to associate what they were seeing with something deeper. It wasn't just about appearance anymore, it became a reflection of your personality. The way you dress began to feel like an extension of how you think, how you express yourself, how comfortable you are in your own identity. And that realization didn't come all at once. It built gradually, through repeated observation, through moments where they found themselves noticing the same thing again and again. They may not have even realized why it was affecting them at first. It was just a feeling, a sense that there was something about you that felt authentic. And authenticity is something people recognize instinctively, even if they can't immediately explain it. The more they noticed, the more it stayed in their thoughts. They might have tried to ignore it at first, brushing it off as something unimportant, something that didn't need attention. But it kept returning. And when something keeps returning without effort, it begins to take on meaning. They started comparing without even meaning to. They noticed how others presented themselves, how often it felt calculated or influenced by external expectations. And then they thought of you, and the difference became clear. What they saw in you didn't feel like an attempt to impress, it felt like a natural expression of who you are. And that difference is what made it stand out more with each passing moment. It created a kind of quiet admiration that they didn't expect. Not because of how you looked, but because of what your presence communicated without words. The way you wear your clothes became a symbol of something deeper, confidence without arrogance, comfort without carelessness, individuality without trying to stand out too much. These are qualities that are not easy to find, and when they are seen, they leave an impression that stays. This is why that small detail didn't fade from their mind. It wasn't just something they noticed once and forgot. It became something they kept returning to, something they associated with you as a whole. And over time, it began to influence how they saw you entirely. What started as a simple observation turned into a deeper understanding of your presence, your energy, and the way you exist in the world without forcing it. You may not realize how powerful that is, because to you, it's just normal. It's just the way you are. But for them, it became something meaningful, something that made them pause and look at you differently. And once someone starts to see you through that lens, it changes everything about how they perceive you moving forward. As this quiet observation continued to grow inside them, it slowly shifted from something they simply noticed into something they began to think about more deeply, and this is where everything started to take on a different kind of meaning. What once felt like a small detail became something that kept returning to their thoughts without effort, appearing in moments when they weren't even trying to think about it. They might have been focused on something else, going through their usual routine, and suddenly a memory of you would come back, not just of you, but of the way you carried yourself, the way you wore what you wore with a sense of ease that didn't feel forced. And each time it returned, it brought with it a feeling they couldn't fully explain at first. It wasn't just attraction, and it wasn't just curiosity. It was something more subtle, something that felt like recognition. They began to realize that what they had noticed about you wasn't just about appearance, it was about consistency. The way you present yourself doesn't change depending on who you're around or where you are. There's a certain steadiness in it, a quiet confidence that doesn't need validation. And that is something that stands out more than anything obvious ever could. The more they reflected on it, the more they started to connect it to your personality. They began to see that the way you dress is not separate from who you are, it's an extension of it. It reflects how you think, how you carry yourself emotionally, how comfortable you are with your own identity. And this realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, through repeated moments of observation and reflection, until it became something they couldn't ignore. They may have even started comparing these impressions with others around them, noticing how often people adjust themselves to fit expectations, how often appearance becomes something that is shaped by external influence rather than internal comfort. And then they thought of you again, and the difference became even clearer. What they saw in you didn't feel influenced or constructed, it felt natural. It felt like you were simply being yourself, without needing to prove anything. And that realization created a kind of respect that they didn't expect. Because authenticity is something people don't always recognize immediately, but once they do, it becomes something they value deeply. This is when their thoughts about you began to change in a more noticeable way. It was no longer just about remembering what they saw, it was about understanding what it meant. They began to associate your presence with a certain feeling, something calm, something real, something that didn't require effort to be noticed. And that feeling stayed with them. It didn't fade the way small observations usually do. Instead, it became something they returned to again and again, almost without realizing it. They might have found themselves thinking about you in moments when they didn't expect to, recalling small details that seemed insignificant at first but now felt important. And this is how a simple observation turns into something deeper, it becomes tied to emotion. The more they thought about it, the more they began to feel that there was something about you that stood out in a way they couldn't easily explain. Not because it was loud or attention-seeking, but because it was genuine. And genuine qualities are often the ones that leave the strongest impression over time. They may not have expressed this to anyone yet, but internally, their perception of you has already changed. You are no longer just someone they noticed, you are someone they are beginning to understand in a different way. And that understanding is what makes this moment significant. Because once someone begins to see you beyond surface-level details, once they start connecting those details to who you are as a person, it changes how they think about you entirely. What started as a simple observation has now become something meaningful, something that has quietly shaped the way they view you, and something that is continuing to grow in their thoughts without them even trying to make it happen. As this awareness continues to deepen inside them, it begins to move beyond simple observation and turns into something that affects how they feel whenever they think about you, and this is where everything starts to shift in a more emotional and meaningful way. What once seemed like a small detail, the way you wear your clothes, has now become something they associate with a certain feeling, a kind of presence that stays in their mind longer than they expected. They begin to realize that it's not just about what they saw, but about how it made them feel without them even understanding why at first. There is something about the way you carry yourself that creates a sense of ease, a natural confidence that doesn't ask for attention but still receives it. And that kind of energy is rare, because it cannot be forced or imitated. The more they reflect on it, the more they begin to understand that what they noticed about you is connected to something deeper than appearance. It reflects a kind of self-awareness, a quiet understanding of who you are, and a comfort in that identity that doesn't need to be adjusted for anyone else. And this realization begins to stay with them in a way that is difficult to ignore. They may find themselves thinking about you at unexpected times, not just remembering what you wore, but remembering the feeling it created, the sense that you were simply being yourself without trying to impress anyone. And that feeling becomes the reason why their thoughts keep returning to you. Because people don't just remember what they see, they remember how something made them feel. And what you created for them, without even trying, was a feeling of authenticity that is difficult to find. As this continues, they begin to notice how different that felt compared to others. They may observe how often people change themselves depending on their environment, how often they adjust their appearance or behavior to fit expectations or gain approval. And then they think of you again, and the contrast becomes even clearer. What they saw in you didn't feel like something shaped by outside influence. It felt like something that came from within, something that was consistent and real. And that realization begins to create a kind of admiration that grows quietly over time. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of the consistency of what they are seeing. They may not talk about it openly, but internally, their perception of you has already changed. You are no longer just someone they noticed, you are someone they are beginning to value in a different way. And that value comes from understanding, not just attraction. They begin to see that what makes you stand out is not something obvious, but something subtle and genuine. And those are the qualities that leave the strongest impression, because they are not easy to find. This is when their thoughts about you begin to carry more emotional weight. It is no longer just curiosity, it becomes something more personal. They start to feel that there is something about you that they don't fully understand yet, but want to understand more. And that curiosity is what keeps bringing them back to you in their thoughts. They may replay small moments in their mind, trying to make sense of why those details stayed with them, why something so simple became something so meaningful. And the more they think about it, the more they begin to realize that it's not just about the detail itself, it's about what it represents. It represents a kind of authenticity that they recognize but don't often see. And once they recognize it, it becomes something they can't ignore. This is how a small observation turns into something deeper. It becomes connected to emotion, to perception, to the way they now see you as a whole. And that shift is important, because once someone begins to see you in that way, it changes everything about how they think about you moving forward. You may not be aware of this process at all. From your side, nothing has changed. You are simply being yourself, moving through your day without thinking about how you are being perceived. But on their side, something has already shifted. Their awareness has deepened, their perception has changed, and the way they see you is no longer casual or surface level. It is becoming something more defined, something more meaningful. And once something reaches that level, it does not stay quiet for long. As this awareness continues to deepen, it reaches a point where it no longer feels like just a passing impression or a quiet observation, but something that begins to influence how they think about you in a much more intentional and focused way, and this is where everything starts to shift from simple noticing into something that carries real emotional weight. What once felt like a small detail now feels connected to something much bigger, and they begin to realize that what they saw in you wasn't accidental or random, but a reflection of something consistent and genuine within you. The way you wear your clothes, the way you move without hesitation, the way you don't seem to adjust yourself to match expectations, these things start to form a pattern in their mind, and that pattern begins to define how they understand you as a person. They may not have words for it immediately, but they feel it. They feel that there is something about you that doesn't shift depending on the environment, something that remains steady no matter the situation, and that kind of consistency is something people recognize deeply, even if they don't consciously think about it at first. As this continues, they begin to pay more attention, not in an obvious or deliberate way, but in subtle moments where their awareness naturally returns to you. They might notice how you carry yourself in different situations, how your presence remains the same whether you are in a relaxed setting or something more structured, and that consistency reinforces what they have already begun to feel, that what you present is not something constructed, but something real. And that realization creates a sense of trust in their perception of you. Because when something feels real, it doesn't create confusion, it creates clarity. And clarity is what allows their thoughts about you to become more defined. They are no longer just noticing details, they are understanding what those details mean. They begin to associate your presence with a sense of authenticity, a quiet confidence that doesn't rely on attention or approval, and that kind of energy is rare enough that when it is recognized, it leaves a lasting impression. This is when their thoughts about you begin to carry more intention. They may find themselves thinking about you not just in random moments, but with purpose, trying to understand more about what they have already started to see. They may begin to reflect on interactions, on the way you communicate, on how everything about you seems to align in a way that feels natural rather than forced. And this alignment is what makes their perception of you stronger, because it shows consistency between how you present yourself and who you are. There is no disconnect, no sense that what they are seeing is different from what is real. And that consistency is what builds something deeper than simple attraction. It builds respect, interest, and a desire to understand more. They may not express this outwardly yet, but internally, their perspective has already shifted. You are no longer just someone they noticed, you are someone they are beginning to value in a way that goes beyond surface-level impressions. And that value comes from recognition, from seeing something in you that feels genuine and stable. As this continues, they may start comparing this feeling to other experiences, noticing how rare it is to encounter someone who feels so naturally themselves. They may realize that what they are experiencing is not something they can easily replace or ignore, because it is tied to something deeper than appearance. It is tied to presence. And presence is something that cannot be imitated or recreated easily. It is something that either exists or it doesn't. And what they see in you is something that clearly exists. This realization begins to create a quiet but steady emotional response, something that builds over time rather than appearing all at once. They may not feel overwhelmed by it, but they feel it consistently, and consistency is what gives something meaning. The more they think about it, the more it stays with them, the more it becomes part of how they see you. And once something becomes part of that perception, it doesn't fade easily. You may not be aware of any of this happening. From your perspective, nothing has changed. You are simply being yourself, moving through your day without thinking about how you are being perceived. But on their side, everything is shifting. Their awareness has deepened, their understanding has grown, and the way they see you is no longer casual. It is becoming something defined, something meaningful, something that carries weight. And once something reaches that level, it naturally leads to something more, because understanding always leads to feeling, and feeling eventually leads to action. As everything continues to build inside them, it begins to reach a point where their thoughts are no longer just reflective or observational, but something that starts to carry a sense of emotional urgency, and this is where the shift becomes even more noticeable on their side, even if it is still invisible to you. What once felt like quiet admiration or curiosity has now turned into something deeper, something that they cannot easily set aside or ignore anymore. The way you present yourself, the way you carry your energy through something as simple as how you wear your clothes, has now become tied to how they feel when they think about you as a whole. It is no longer just a detail. It has become a symbol in their mind of everything they associate with you: authenticity, comfort, confidence, and a kind of natural presence that doesn't need to be explained. And once something becomes symbolic like that, it begins to hold emotional weight. They may find themselves thinking about you more often now, not just in passing moments, but in a way that feels intentional, even if they don't consciously choose it. Their mind returns to you during quiet moments, during pauses in their day, during times when there is nothing distracting them. And when the mind keeps returning to the same person without effort, it usually means something deeper is forming. They may start to notice that their attention shifts more easily toward anything connected to you, whether it's a memory, a small detail, or even something that reminds them of your presence. And this repeated attention creates something powerful. It strengthens the emotional connection without any direct interaction. At the same time, they begin to realize that what they are feeling is not something they expected to develop in this way. It may surprise them, because it didn't start with something obvious or dramatic. It started with something small, something subtle, something they could have easily ignored. But because it stayed, because it kept returning, it grew into something they now have to acknowledge. And that acknowledgement is what changes everything. Because once someone admits to themselves that something matters, they can no longer treat it as something unimportant. They begin to take it seriously, even if they don't show it outwardly yet. This is when their thoughts about you begin to shift from passive to active. They are no longer just noticing or reflecting, they are beginning to consider what this means and what they should do about it. They may start to wonder how you see them, whether you are aware of the impression you have made, whether you would understand what they are feeling if they were to express it. These questions create a new layer of thought, one that moves beyond observation into intention. But with intention also comes hesitation. Because now that they recognize that what they feel is real, they also recognize that acting on it involves risk. They may question whether they should say something, whether they should approach you, whether they should keep everything to themselves. This internal conflict is natural, because when something becomes meaningful, the fear of misunderstanding or rejection becomes part of the process. But even with that hesitation, the feeling does not go away. In fact, it becomes stronger, because once something is recognized as important, it does not return to being neutral. It continues to grow, quietly but steadily. They may begin to imagine what it would be like to express what they feel, how they would explain it, how you might respond. These thoughts may feel uncertain, but they also feel necessary, because the idea of doing nothing is starting to feel uncomfortable. And this is the moment where everything begins to move toward action, even if it has not happened yet. The emotional weight they carry is no longer something they can ignore, and that weight is what begins to push them forward. You may still not see any of this happening, because everything is still unfolding internally. But internally, they are no longer in the same place. Their awareness has turned into feeling, their feeling has turned into importance, and that importance is now turning into a desire to act. And once someone reaches that stage, it is only a matter of time before what they have been holding inside begins to show in a way that cannot be hidden anymore. As everything continues to build within them, it reaches a point where what they have been feeling can no longer stay contained, and this is where the shift becomes undeniable, because the quiet thoughts and internal reflections that once felt manageable now begin to push outward, creating a sense of urgency that they can no longer ignore. What started as a subtle observation has now transformed into something that carries emotional intensity, something that follows them throughout their day, something that refuses to fade no matter how much they try to focus on other things. They may find themselves thinking about you more frequently than before, not just in random moments, but in a way that feels constant, as if their mind keeps returning to you without asking for permission. And this is when they begin to understand that what they are feeling is not temporary, not something that will simply pass with time. It is something real that has grown beyond their control. The more they try to suppress it, the more it resurfaces, stronger each time. And this repetition is what begins to create pressure inside them. Because when something meaningful is left unspoken for too long, it does not disappear, it builds. And the longer it builds, the more difficult it becomes to hold it in. They may begin to feel restless, unable to fully relax, unable to distract themselves the way they used to. Even when they are surrounded by other people or engaged in other activities, there is a part of their mind that keeps returning to you, to the way they see you, to the feeling they associate with your presence. And this constant return creates a kind of emotional tension that they cannot easily resolve on their own. They may start to realize that what they are experiencing is not just admiration or curiosity anymore. It has turned into something deeper, something that carries meaning, something that demands to be acknowledged. And once that realization becomes clear, everything begins to change. Because when someone understands that what they feel is real, they can no longer pretend that it doesn't matter. They begin to take it seriously, even if they don't show it outwardly yet. This is when their thoughts begin to shift from reflection into decision. They start asking themselves not just what they feel, but what they should do about it. And this question creates a new level of intensity, because it introduces the idea of action. They may go back and forth internally, one moment feeling certain that they should express what they feel, the next moment hesitating because of uncertainty. They may wonder how you will respond, whether you will understand, whether they are too late to say something. And this uncertainty creates hesitation, but it does not remove the feeling. In fact, the feeling continues to grow stronger, because now it is tied to the possibility of action. They may begin to imagine different scenarios. What it would be like to reach out to you, how they would start the conversation, what they would say, how they would explain something that feels so complex in such a simple way. And this is not easy for them, because what they are feeling is layered. It is built from observation, from repeated thoughts, from emotional realization, and from a growing sense that something important cannot remain unspoken forever. They may try to find the right moment, the right words, the right approach, but at the same time, they are starting to realize that waiting for the perfect moment may not be possible. Because the longer they wait, the stronger the pressure becomes. And eventually, that pressure reaches a point where it outweighs the fear of taking a risk. This is the turning point. When the discomfort of staying silent becomes greater than the fear of speaking, action becomes inevitable. And this is where the energy begins to shift toward something you will soon be able to feel or see. Because once someone reaches this stage, they are no longer passive in their thoughts. They are moving toward a decision, even if they haven't fully acted on it yet. You may still not be aware of this internal process, because it is happening quietly on their side. But the intensity of what they are feeling is growing with each passing moment, and that intensity is what will eventually push them to do something that breaks the pattern of silence. What they are about to do may feel sudden to you, unexpected, even surprising. But it is not sudden at all. It is the result of everything that has been building inside them over time. And now, they are reaching the point where holding it in is no longer an option, where something has to be expressed, where the silence that once kept everything contained is about to be broken in a way that will change the direction of everything between you. Now everything reaches a point where the internal pressure they have been carrying finally turns into something that can no longer remain hidden, and this is where the shift becomes visible, where what has been building quietly inside them begins to move outward in a way that breaks the silence completely. Up until now, they have been holding everything within themselves, the thoughts, the memories, the realizations, the emotions that kept growing stronger with time. But there comes a moment when holding it in feels heavier than expressing it, and that is exactly where they are now. The silence that once felt manageable has now turned into something uncomfortable, something that feels like it is holding them back rather than protecting them. They may begin to feel that if they don't act, they will lose something important, something they can no longer pretend is insignificant. And this realization is what pushes them to the edge of action. They are no longer asking themselves whether they feel something, they already know that answer. Now they are asking themselves what they are going to do about it. And this question carries weight, because it involves stepping into uncertainty, into a situation where they cannot control the outcome. They don't know how you will respond, they don't know whether you will understand what they are trying to express, and they don't know if too much time has passed. But despite all of that uncertainty, the need to act continues to grow stronger. Because doing nothing is no longer an option that feels comfortable. It feels like avoidance, like letting something meaningful slip away without even trying to hold on to it. And that is what they are no longer willing to accept. This is the stage where everything begins to move quickly on their side, even if it has taken time to build up to this point. They may suddenly feel a surge of clarity, as if all the thoughts they have been carrying come together into one undeniable understanding: you matter to them more than they allowed themselves to admit before. And once that truth becomes clear, it changes everything. It removes the confusion, it removes the doubt, and it replaces hesitation with intention. They may still feel nervous, they may still feel unsure, but those feelings are no longer strong enough to stop them. Instead, they become part of the process, part of the risk they are willing to take. Because now, the fear of losing this connection completely is greater than the fear of what might happen if they reach out. This is why what they are about to do may feel intense or unexpected from your perspective. It may not come out in a calm or perfectly controlled way. It may feel sudden, emotional, even out of character for them. But it is not random. It is the result of everything they have been holding inside finally reaching the surface. When emotions are suppressed for a long time, they do not come out slowly, they come out all at once, with intensity. And that is what you are about to see. They may reach out in a way that feels different from how they have approached you before. They may express things they never said, reveal thoughts they kept hidden, or take a step they would have avoided in the past. And while it may feel surprising to you, for them it feels necessary. It feels like something that had to happen, something that could no longer be delayed. At the same time, there is vulnerability behind this action. Even if they appear confident or direct, there is uncertainty underneath. They are stepping into a situation where they do not know the outcome, where they are exposing something real about how they feel. And that vulnerability is what makes this moment important. Because it shows that what they are expressing is not casual, it is something that carries meaning for them. You may feel a mix of emotions when this happens: surprise, curiosity, maybe even confusion. But what is important to understand is that this moment is not just about what they are doing. It is about what has been building over time, finally becoming visible. It is the result of silence turning into realization, realization turning into emotion, and emotion turning into action. And once it reaches this stage, there is no going back to how things were before. The dynamic has already changed. The truth has already come to the surface. And now, everything that happens next will be shaped by how both of you respond to this moment, making it one of the most important turning points in your connection. Now everything has reached its final stage, where what once felt hidden, uncertain, and quietly building inside them is no longer something that can be contained, and this is where the entire situation settles into a new reality that cannot be reversed or ignored. The silence that once created distance has now done its work. It revealed what needed to be seen, it forced awareness where there was once comfort, and it brought emotions to the surface that had been quietly growing without acknowledgement. What you are witnessing now, or about to witness, is not just a sudden action or an unexpected moment. It is the result of everything that has been unfolding beneath the surface for a long time. Every thought they had, every memory that returned, every moment of hesitation, and every realization that grew stronger with time has led to this point. And now that it has reached this stage, there is no going back to how things were before. The dynamic between you has already shifted. What was once unspoken is now expressed. What was once uncertain is now clear. And what was once hidden is now visible. They have crossed the point where silence felt easier, and now they are standing in a place where honesty feels necessary. This is what makes this moment so powerful, because it is not just about what they are doing, it is about what has been revealed. Their actions are simply the final step of a process that began the moment your silence created space for reflection. And that reflection turned into understanding, that understanding turned into emotion, and that emotion turned into the need to act. You may feel that everything is happening quickly now, that things have shifted in a way you didn't expect, but from their perspective, this has been building for a long time. It only feels sudden because you are seeing the result, not the process that led to it. And now that everything is out in the open, you are in a position where your awareness becomes just as important as their action. Because this moment is not only about what they have done, it is about what you will do next. You are no longer in a place of uncertainty where you have to guess what they feel or what they might do. That part is over. You have clarity now. You can see the truth of the situation, not through assumptions, but through what has been revealed directly. And that clarity gives you something powerful, it gives you control over your response. You are not required to react immediately. You are not required to match their intensity or mirror their emotions. Instead, you have the ability to pause, to understand, to process what this means for you personally. Because while they are acting from a place of built-up emotion, you are stepping into this moment with awareness. And that awareness allows you to remain grounded, even when the situation feels intense. You may begin to reflect on your own feelings now, asking yourself how you see this connection at this stage, whether what they are expressing aligns with what you feel now, or whether your perspective has changed during the time of silence. These are important questions, because your response should come from your own clarity, not from the pressure of the moment. This is where your strength lies. In your ability to choose consciously rather than react emotionally. You may realize that there is still something there, something worth exploring now that everything is honest and visible. Or you may realize that while the connection was meaningful, it belongs to a different time, and it no longer fits in the same way. Both of these realizations are valid, because what matters now is not what existed before, but what exists in the present. And this is what this entire process was leading to. Not just their action, but your clarity. Because clarity is what allows you to move forward without confusion, without doubt, and without being influenced by emotions you do not fully understand. It allows you to trust yourself, to trust your perspective, and to make decisions that align with who you are now. As everything settles, the intensity that once surrounded this situation begins to transform into something calmer, something more stable, something that you can understand without feeling overwhelmed. Not because everything is perfectly resolved, but because nothing is hidden anymore. And when nothing is hidden, there is no confusion left. There is only truth, and truth is what allows you to move forward with confidence. This moment, as intense as it may feel, is actually a moment of clarity, a moment where everything that was uncertain has now become visible. And once something becomes visible, it cannot return to being hidden again. The connection has changed, the dynamic has shifted, and now everything that happens next will be shaped by the choices made from this point forward. And those choices are now yours to make, not from a place of confusion, but from a place of full understanding of everything that has just been revealed. Now that everything has unfolded and the truth is no longer hidden, this is where the deeper meaning of the entire situation begins to reveal itself to you in a way that is calm, grounded, and clear, because what once felt intense and emotionally charged starts to settle into understanding. And understanding is what allows you to see not just what happened, but why it happened the way it did. The silence, which may have once felt confusing or even frustrating, now takes on a completely different role when you look at it from this perspective. It was not just distance, it was a space that allowed both of you to see things that could not have been seen while everything was active and constant. It created a pause, and within that pause, awareness was able to grow on both sides, even if that growth happened in different ways and at different speeds. For them, it brought realization, a deeper understanding of what they felt and what the connection meant to them. For you, it brought clarity, a chance to step back and observe without being influenced by their presence or their energy. And now, with everything that has been revealed, you are no longer in the same position you were before this silence began. You are no longer reacting to something unclear or trying to understand something that feels confusing. You are standing in a place where everything has already shown itself. Their actions, their words, the intensity behind what they expressed, it has all been revealed. And once something is revealed at that level, it cannot go back to being hidden or uncertain. This is why this moment feels different. It is not just another phase or another interaction. It is a turning point, one that separates what was unclear from what is now understood. And in this moment, your role becomes the most important part of what happens next. Because while they have already taken their step, you are now the one who decides the direction moving forward. This is where your awareness becomes your strength. You are not being pulled into something without understanding it. You are not being asked to react without thinking. You are being given the opportunity to choose, based on everything you now know. And that choice does not have to be rushed. In fact, this is the moment where taking your time becomes the most important thing you can do. Because when something carries this level of meaning, it deserves to be understood fully before any decision is made. You may begin to notice that your emotions are not as intense as theirs were when they acted, and that is not a mistake, it is because you are approaching this from a different place. They acted from build-up, from everything they had been holding inside. You are responding from awareness, from a place where everything is already visible. And that difference is what allows you to remain grounded. You can observe what they did, understand why they did it, and still remain connected to your own perspective without being overwhelmed by theirs. This is what gives you clarity. You may start to ask yourself deeper questions now. What does this connection mean to you at this stage? Has your perspective changed during the time of silence? Do you feel aligned with what they are expressing now, or do you feel that you have moved in a different direction? These questions are not meant to create confusion, they are meant to bring you closer to your own truth. Because the purpose of everything that has happened is not to force a specific outcome, but to reveal the truth on both sides so that whatever happens next is based on understanding, not assumption. You may realize that there is still something there, something that feels real and worth exploring now that everything is clear. Or you may realize that while the connection was meaningful, it belongs to a version of the past that no longer fits who you are now. Both outcomes are valid, because what matters is not what used to be, but what feels true in the present moment. This is what makes this stage so important. It is no longer about what they feel or what they have done. It is about what you feel and what you choose to do with that awareness. As everything continues to settle, you may also notice a sense of calm replacing the intensity that once surrounded the situation. Not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is hidden anymore. There is no guessing, no uncertainty, no confusion. There is only clarity. And clarity is what allows you to move forward without hesitation. Whether you choose to reconnect, to explore what has been revealed, or to move in a different direction entirely, your decision will come from a place of understanding, not emotion alone. And that is what gives it strength. This entire experience, from the silence to the realization to the action that followed, was not just about them, it was about both of you reaching a point where everything could be seen clearly. And now that it has, the path forward is no longer something that will happen to you, it is something you will consciously choose, based on everything you now understand. Now you have reached the final stage of this entire journey, where everything that once felt uncertain, emotional, and difficult to understand has fully transformed into something clear, stable, and entirely within your awareness. And this is the point where you begin to see that nothing that happened between you and your soulmate was random or without purpose. Every moment of silence, every thought that grew in their mind, every realization that pushed them toward action, and every feeling that surfaced along the way was part of a process that brought both of you to this exact place of clarity. What once felt like confusion now feels like understanding. What once felt like distance now feels like necessary space. And what once felt like unanswered questions now feels like something that has already revealed its answers, even if those answers came in a way you did not expect. This is where you begin to recognize that the silence was not something that took away from the connection, it was something that revealed the truth of it. Without that silence, they may have never realized what you truly meant to them. Without that distance, they may have continued moving forward without ever stopping to understand the depth of what they felt. And without that pause, you may not have had the opportunity to step back and see everything from your own perspective, without being influenced by their presence or their emotions. This is why this moment feels different now. It no longer carries the same emotional weight or uncertainty that it once did. Instead, it carries clarity, and clarity is what changes everything. Because when you see something clearly, you are no longer reacting to it, you are choosing how to move forward with it. And that choice is what defines what happens next. You are no longer in a position where you are waiting to see what they will do or trying to understand what they feel. That part of the journey is complete. They have already shown you. They have already expressed what was hidden. They have already taken their step. And now, everything rests in your hands, not as pressure, but as freedom. You have the freedom to decide what this connection means to you now, based on everything you have seen and understood. And that freedom is what gives you control over your next move. You may find yourself reflecting on how much has changed from the beginning of this situation to now. At first, there may have been confusion, uncertainty, even a sense of imbalance where things felt unclear or undefined. But now, that confusion is gone. You understand what happened, why it happened, and what it revealed. And that understanding removes the emotional weight that once made everything feel overwhelming. You are no longer caught in the intensity of the moment, you are standing outside of it, able to see it fully. And from that place, your decisions become stronger, more grounded, and more aligned with who you are now. You may realize that your feelings have evolved during this process. Time, distance, and reflection have a way of changing perspective, and that is natural. You are not the same person you were when everything was active and constant, and they are not the same person either. Both of you have gone through a process of awareness, even if it happened differently on each side. And now, the connection you are looking at is no longer the same as it was before, it has been tested, revealed, and understood in a deeper way. This is why whatever you choose next will not be based on assumption or expectation, it will be based on truth. And truth is what allows something to either move forward in a real way or to be released without regret. Because when something is understood fully, there is no need to question it afterward. You will know why you chose what you chose. You will understand your own reasoning, and that understanding is what gives you peace. As you move forward from this point, you may notice that everything feels calmer, more stable, more certain. Not because everything is resolved in a perfect way, but because there is nothing left hidden. And when nothing is hidden, there is no confusion left to create doubt. There is only clarity, and clarity is what allows you to move forward with confidence. Whether you choose to reconnect and explore what has been revealed, or whether you choose to move in a different direction entirely, your decision will come from a place of awareness, not reaction. And that is what makes this final stage so important. It is not about what happened, it is about what you understand now. Because understanding is what transforms an experience into something meaningful, something that stays with you not as confusion, but as growth. This entire journey, from silence to realization to action, has brought you to a place where you are no longer guessing, no longer wondering, no longer uncertain. You are clear. And in that clarity, you have everything you need to decide what comes next, not based on what once was, but based on what is true for you now.